Hey, welcome everyone. Today we're going to be talking about the full stack application process. We're mainly going to concentrate on how it is that we're going to conduct authentication process. But I do have an entire project set up so that we can cover the entire CRUD operation as to how everything works. And that may help us just visualize everything as far as how things fall into place, how to talk to one another, how your front end's going to continuously send requests to your back end. So let's start taking a look at our project here. In my server, I have a couple of API endpoints, such as if I go into my authorization headers, or excuse me, into my headers, you can see that I already have a token. When I send this GET request, it comes back with a user that has an email, and then hopefully a full name is provided. I can come over to something like tasks, send my GET request, and you can see that tasks come up where all tasks are tied to that one user. And I can send put requests to each one of these to be able to update them. For example, here we have code. If I send to task one, I get code, change this over to a put request, come over to my body, and let's say that we change this to completed is true. All right, we send our put request, and now we can see that our task is now completed. Now, this is all within a Django server. I can come over to my VS Code, and I can see the Django server is processing all of those requests. It looks like my client shut down, so let me go ahead and run that. Oh, where am I at? Missing server, camera. Oh, dev. There you go. Syntactical sugar happens. All right. Now, what are we looking at from our front-end application? So for my front-end application, I have this nice little task manager that will be able to log out. We'll change this button to only appear if there is a user. We can see here that I can type in an email, I can type in a password. When I click login, it's going to navigate me here, and it's going to also update the state of my user. If I come over to the console, the user before was null. Now we have an object where I have the email and full name. Now nothing is connected yet. This is actually just mock JSON data that I have in the front end. I can go ahead and demonstrate that. If I come over to the client inside of sources, I have data. Here I have my user.json, and here's the tasks.json. All right, so essentially a copy and paste as to what those responses that I'm working with look like. And I'm utilizing this information to just start rendering or start the development process when I'm working within my application. If I continue to take a look here, I'm able to actually add new objects. So I can say, I don't know, code more in React, right? So then we can see the code more in React gets placed in. I can edit, a modal comes up. So here's the editing task, code more in React. I want to mark it as complete, and I want to mark React. Click update. There we can see we have this code more in React. Now it's marked as completed. I can go into deleting the tasks, and the tasks is removed. I can type a bunch of stuff, click this reset button, and it resets my input string. So a couple of really cool things going on there. I do have this weird React warning, which I can't get rid of, but that's okay. Warnings in React are not something that I'm completely worried about now. All right, and this is the application that we'll be working with, where all of our CRUD operations are going to be happening here from the tasks. But we are going to go through the authentication process through this sign up form. We can also see that we have, or I don't have an account. So if I switch that, we get two more fields where we can keep track of first name and last name. If we switch it back, then it just sends us back to our email and password. All right. Any questions over this React application or this Django server before we start diving into the full stack process? Is there any specific block of code that we would like to take a look at? Go ahead, Rick.
This may be because I was out yesterday. I may just have to read up on it, but uh, is this batteries included for like the authentication in Django? Is that a batteries included thing that's included in Django?
For authentication purposes, we're utilizing the abstract
Yes,
base user.
authentication.
Yeah, we're going to be utilizing the abstract base user.
Uh,
Let me go ahead and show that real quick. It is from yesterday's
well,
lecture.
yeah. I need to catch up on that lecture, so I can watch it later. That's fine.
Okay, perfect. All right. With that said, let's go ahead and dive into how we would actually connect these two. All right. So currently, right now, I have two completely separate APIs or two completely separate servers running inside of one machine. Let's go ahead and open up TLDraw and take a look at what our machine is currently operating. As soon as it loads. There you go. All right. So in TLDraw, we can look here and identify we have our machine, which has a series of ports. In port 8000, we have our Django application running, or a Django API. That's what I'll call it. And on port 5432, I believe that's it. You know what? 5432, that is Postgres. Here we have PostgreSQL running as our relational database management system. And I can't remember React off the top of my head, so I'm gonna grab it. It's 5173. Nice. And then at port 5173, we have our client or our React application. Now they're all within the same machine, but they're occupying different ports, meaning that each one of them are standing up their own server. For example, in port 8000, I actually have a Django server, and it's a Django development server. So I'll make sure to explain that this is going to tie to our deployment application tomorrow. In port 5173, I have a Vite development server that's currently rendering my entire all of my files. So this is what's going on within my machine. We have already talked about how relational database management systems and Django talk. They talk through PsychoPG, right? So we know that communication is already happening, where communication is going back and forth between our Django API and our PostgreSQL database. Right? We do that by fixing all our settings.py, updating our database schema or database configuration, and by installing PsychoPG. That's what allows for this communication to happen. But now, what we need is to concentrate on the communication between our front end and our back end. Now, the communication between our front end and back end becomes a little bit complicated. Since they're in separate networks, we need to tell them that they can speak to one another. For example, there's the whole HTTP handshake that we talked about not too long ago, where when a request is sent, it's saying, hey, can we talk? Well, we learned this when we got our first intro to full stack. When that request is sent back, we then get an either yes or no, we cannot talk. If the request is yes, so if we get a yes from there, we then make a request for data. And if that request for data can be processed by the server, we get back a data response. Right, so here's the communication that we have to set up where we have, hey, can we talk? Yes, we can. If so, here's the data that I need, and here's the response. All right, let's check out how this process is going to happen. I'm going to come over to my React application. And inside of my React application, I'm going to actually create a brand new file inside of my source directory that I'm going to name utilities. Or you can name it API, whichever you would like to name it. I personally like to name it utilities because it's all the utilities I'm going to need to speak to my API. So in my utilities, I'm going to just simply send a request to Axios, through Axios to speak to Django. So I'm going to go ahead and create an Axios function. So I'll say export, and here we have our const of test connection. I'm going to send an asynchronous request. And here I'll say let response be equal to await Axios. That doesn't look to recognize it. So let me go ahead and import it explicitly. All right, so we're going to import Axios there. And I'm going to wait for Axios to send a GET request to HTTP 127.0.0.1 slash, or excuse me, at port 8000. And I'm going to send it to an endpoint named test. And I'm just simply going to console.log the response. Now I want to make sure this all works. Now I'm going to actually go into my Django project and I'm going to create this test endpoint. So here's my test API project or my task API project. I can go into URLs. I can go ahead and say from django.http, or I can even bring in response. Let's say from REST framework.views. I want to import response. And here I can do a whole test connection where I can take in a request. And I'm just going to return a response stating connecting. All right, so there's my response. I can add the URL endpoint. I'm going to say path, which is of test. We'll utilize the test connection function and then close it. All right, currently Django is running. My server for my React application is still running. Let's actually send this request. I'm currently exporting this test connection. I'm going to go into app.jsx, and inside of a use effect, I'm going to make that call. So I'll say use effect. I want to test connection. All right. Everything's still running. I'm gonna inspect my server, come over to my console, and you can see that when I run that test connection, I'm getting this request, this error being handled here. And it's happening twice because it's in a use effect. So it's happening upon mounting and dismounting. And it gives me, hey, access to HTML HTTP requests at port 127 8000 from origin, localhost 5173 has been blocked by course. All right, no access control allow origin, header is present on the request source. So this is telling me, hey, we can't speak to each other. When we're talking about this drawing here, the response that React is receiving is no from my Django server. It's saying, hey, can we talk? Because I really need some data. And our Django APIs are saying, no, we can't. As far as I know, the only people that I'm allowed to speak to are me, myself, and I, because nobody has described to me any other way to compile data or share data. So we actually have to go into our Django server and install something called course. Luckily, someone has already done this for us. We can look up Django course headers. I really like to utilize the StackHawk article. It gets updated pretty often. And they have like the most up-to-date documentation about course. It's easy to read through. And it tells me, hey, do you need course? It goes through the process of why you would need course. Here's the public API development, which is what we're building. It's telling you where to configure course. This is a really good article to read through just to really understand what's going on with course. Well, CORE stands for Cross-Origin Resource Sharing. It's essentially saying that we're sharing resources across different origins, where every origin is represented by a port or a server. We have a server in port 8000, and we have a server in port 5173. They want to share information between one another. This is pretty relatable to what a cloud infrastructure is going to look like whenever you're going to deploy your application. You'll have your React application living somewhere else on the cloud. And when it's trying to talk to your EC2 instance that's hosting your server, it's going to require cross-origin resource sharing. So let's go into the process. This is how we can actually install Django core setters. So it gives me a command there. I'm going to come over to Django and crash it. And you can see that it even grabbed the response and sends a pretty good error. Accepted render not on response, and we get this broken pipe. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and kill it. I'm going to execute this Django core setters. All right, so now it tells me that I have the requirements satisfied and available to me. And then tells me, hey, you're gonna want to add course headers right above REST framework. Okay, awesome. I'm gonna come down to my project, get rid of this URLs, open up settings.py, and I'm going to add course headers. Do not forget the comma. All right, so my course headers has been added. I continue to scroll down, and it tells me you're going to need new middleware called course middleware. You could try to figure out where exactly it falls. Before it used to have you install it right under common middleware, but now it's actually providing to you the entire middleware object that you would need. So you could just simply copy and replace your middleware. All right, so here's our middleware. It's exactly the same list with the exception of this course middleware has now been added. All right. And then it tells you, hey, which of your endpoints needs CORS access? So you could specify which endpoints are going to need CORS. So here it tells you, hey, if you're utilizing API, here's a regex that you can apply, right? And we went into naming conventions when we were working with our API. So all of our API endpoints should always end or start, excuse me, with API slash and then continued by a series of characters. So that's why it's important to follow API naming conventions where we have that API slash. That way we can apply tools like course. All right. Here's another URL regex. And then there's the more important part, which is which origins should you have access to? Well, we can actually explain exactly which origins that we want them to have access to. Here's a couple of examples, right? If you utilize the normal React server that comes in with just React and not V, it'll be at port 3000. If you want to allow every single person and not just a dictated number of hosts to be able to communicate, you could always have this course allow origins all be equal to true. And this is okay. If you really wanted something available to everyone, you could do cores allow origins equals true. I would just suggest upgrading your authentication method from token authentication to probably something like JWT tokens at minimum, if not OAuth. And then it shows you in production, rather than having a list of different hosts or excuse me, different ports within your local host, because these are all local hosts. 127.0.0.1 is a representation of local host. It's telling you would want to add the different domains addresses that you're going to be purchasing once you actually go into deployment. All right. For now, I'm going to take this course, origins equals true, and I'm going to add it inside of my settings.py. I like to add it in the same place where all of my true and false statements are coming about, which is where debug is located. There we go. Excuse me. So there's our course allow origins all, which is equal to true. All right. And now with those lines of code being added, we can go ahead and run our server. This will allow communications with all origins for cross-origin resource sharing. So now the response that we are looking for would be yes instead of no. So let's go back into React. Can go ahead and close this. I'm going to refresh it. Okay, so I'm still getting an error, but it's a different type of error. All right, so I'm getting a hey, failed, error code, bad response. There's something going on here, and I believe it's because I'm utilizing a response from API views. So I'm just gonna switch this real quick. I'm gonna say from Django.http, I want to import, why not? Let's do HTTP response. And let's change this object for HTTP response. Okay, I'm gonna send the request one more time. Let me clear my terminal, refresh the page. At first we get null, and then we get this whole data connected. So now we're able to actually speak to our backend server. All right. Again, the original error that we were running into was from course. We went into installing course, which starts off by actually running the command of pip install Django course headers, adding the course headers app into our installed apps, adding the course middleware into our middleware. And then we simply stated that all origins can now talk to our API rather than dictating which specific origins can speak to our API. All right. Does anyone have any questions over how we were able to get our front end and back end speaking to one another? Let's hear it, Tom.
With where your React is located, that's not Django hosting it, right?
That's correct. Django's not hosting it.
Okay, are we going to learn how to have Django host a React app?
We're not, what we created was a stateless application, meaning that our server, our API, and our front end application are going to be separated from one another. And what we're going to do is we're going to actually connect them through Nginx. Nginx is going to be like our master, it's like our top layer parent of our entire application. And then Nginx is going to send requests either to our React application to render static files or send requests over to our API to then give them to our React application. Does that answer your question, Tom?
Yeah.
So, all right. So now I'm able to talk to my server. My React application and my Django API are speaking, they're saying yes, and they're able to share data with one another. Well, now let's start talking about the authentication process. Gonna come over here to URLs. I'm gonna close this down. I'm actually gonna comment out this test connection portion because I don't want to continue to test my connection. And I'm going to start working with my utilities to be able to send request. Now, within my utilities, I actually I don't want to keep rewriting my endpoint over and over again. And I want to save myself some time when I'm sending requests by only having to type in the endpoints that I actually want to reach. So I can do so by creating an Axios instance. I can say export API, and we're going to do this as a const, which is going to be an instance of Axios, as if we grab a class and we're creating an instance of a class, where the base URL that I'm going to be sending requests to every single time will be of HTTP 127.0.0.1 or 8000 /API. So now, when I send requests through my API rather than Axios, all I have to do is add my endpoint. So let's start off with our sign up form. I'm going to go ahead and export const, which is going to sign up a user. This function is going to take in two parameters. Well, actually, it's just going to take in one, where it's going to be the user object. This will be an asynchronous function. And it is going to utilize Axios again. I'll say let response be equal to, and actually I'm just going to grab data straight out from the response so I don't have to deal with it. And it's going to await API dot post, where my post request is going to go over to users slash sign up slash, and the data of my request will just be my user object. So I can specify where data is equal to user object. Or I could just pass in the user object itself, right? Because we do expect this user object to be an object. All right, so that sends my post request. When I send this post request, it's going to come over to my server. I can take a look at my URLs patterns. It's going to go to users, and it looks like there's this V1 portion that I forgot to add. So I'm just going to add that straight into my utilities. That way I still don't have to worry about adding it anymore. All right, I can come back over to my URLs. We can see that it goes into users. That's going to take me to my user app URLs. It's going to trigger this sign up view. I can open up the sign up, which takes in a post request. It's going to grab the data and add the username field, create a user, create a token, log in the user, and then return a response. All right, let's make sure that this works properly. Okay, I'm going to come over to my utilities. I get back that user. So I could just return data. All right, where my return value will have an object where we have a user and a token. So there's my sign up form. How do I actually utilize this inside of React? I can come over to my pages. Here I have my authentication page. In my page, I have something called an auth form. And we can see that this auth form already has a form that has a submit method. It's going to take in all of our groups. It already has our set functions being utilized. And it has the set user that we can set to our user. All right. So const handle auth. I want to handle this authentication. Currently, I'm setting the user to user data, which is coming from that mock JSON data that I have saved. But I want to replace this. Well, I can do this by turning it into an asynchronous function. And I want to await. And simply, I'm just going to send my sign up. All right, I can say let, and here I can grab user, comma, token, be equal to await, sign up, where I can pass in the object for a user. Well, in this object, I have my email field, which will be set to the email state. I have a password field that will be set to the password state. Since I have a username, or excuse me, a first name and last name, we can go ahead and add those as well. So I'll say first name, be of first name, and have last name, be of last name. So there's the entire user object that I'll be passing into that sign up function. That will give me back the user and the token. And I'm just going to set the user to user that is returned. And that will then navigate to tasks. All right. So let's try to isolate this information and explain what's going on. I have my form that will be able to handle my submission when I click on submit. When I submit my form, first, we're going to prevent the default behavior of a form, which is to reset my site. And then I'm going to grab my user and token from my response inside of signup. My signup view will send a request to signup. Excuse me, so my signup function will send a request to my signup view where it expects to return back an object that will have the key of data. That data should have the user and token key. If I come down to my views, I can confirm that. So here's my signup. Here's my user and token keys inside of that dictionary. I could even do some sort of authentication control. I could say, hey, if we could grab the entire response, say if response.status is equal to 201, then I want to return response.data. Otherwise, I would like to return, or I can alert response.data, because that means there's something went wrong with my application, right? It would alert, and I could finally return, this would return null for my entire function. So I could always still set the user to whatever is returned from this. All right. So now I have the ability to check my response status. If it's successful, it returns the data object of my user token. I can come back to my auth form. My auth form will then set the user, which is coming from use outlet contacts, to user, which is the response that I expect to get back. And we'll see how we'll manage the token here shortly. All right, let's make sure all this works. Here I have my authentication form. I'm going to sign up, so I need all of my fields available. I'm going to enter my email. I'm going to do fa@fa.com. Here's fa. And let's do Raul Avila, right? So there you go. Let me open up my inspector, come over to the console to ensure that everything's working there. Okay, we have two elements with non-unique IDs. Okay, that's all right. That's not going to cause any sort of issue here. When I click on sign up, all right, so the sign up request is processed. I'm not sure what this 124 is coming from. The request module source utility does not provide an export named test connection. Okay, that's fine. We don't need to worry about that. Oh, well, actually, we will here shortly, but I'll fix it right now. But now we're seeing fa.fa being logged into my console. This fa.fa is being logged into my console because when I set the user, I am setting it to my response user. And my response in my views is just sending back the user email, right? So I'm able to actually capture my user and store it within my information. Well, what about the token? Right? We're able to send a request. That request is processed by my API, and we can see that it's even navigating us. But what about my token? How do I manage my token in this case? I need a place to store it. And let me come over here to app.jsx because app.jsx is freaking out because of this line of code here where I'm trying to import this test connection. I'm just gonna remove that whole thing. All right. Well, inside of my auth form, I do have both the user and the token, but I need a way to manage this token. Let's try to check how other applications manage their tokens. Let's say I come over to, I like utilizing GitHub as a good example. So if I come over to GitHub and I try to manage my authentication process, how is it that this front-end application on the browser knows who I am? Well, it's because of this cookies that they're managing, right? All these cookies has things like my session, things about me being logged in, other things about my user session. I can even go into their local storage, and in their local storage, they have a ridiculous of other amounts of information. They have a bunch of cached keys that more than likely grant me access to a couple of different, yep, a couple of different React assessments. All of these cached keys is what gives me access to these different repositories. Awesome. Well, I want to essentially use the same logic that they're doing, right? And the reason why we utilize something like local storage or cookies is because right now my application is saving everything inside of a state. The moment that I click refresh, what happens to a state variable?
Resets.
Yeah, my state resets to its first original value that I read when the object was mounted onto the browser. But things like your local storage or your cookies don't change. The browser keeps track of them. Excuse me, everybody. The browser keeps track of them and doesn't allow them to be reset. So we're going to do the same thing with Vite. We're going to leverage our local host to tell the browser, hey, you hold on to this. I want you to keep track of this data so that I don't lose it. All right. So I can come back over to my form. I currently have my token already available to me, and now I can actually work with this information. Well, now that I have my token available to me, what do I want to do? And I don't necessarily have to even manage this within my sign up view. I could just return the token or return the user itself and let this sign up function handle all of this browser manipulation, right? So instead of returning .data, we want to return user dot, or excuse me, we want to return the user. And let's do it this way. Let's let user comma token be equal to response.data. We're going to return the user, which we know is an object. And from there, I can actually refactor this information to set the token into my local storage. Well, local storage is actually a built-in function that comes in with JavaScript. And here I can set an item, which is going to require an alias that we reference it by. In this case, I'll call it token, and then a value, where my value will be the token key that comes in from my headers. All right. Unfortunately, we are going to have to create a couple of users to make sure that this all works. So let's come back here. Currently, I have my application. If I come over to my application tab and take a look at my local storage, here I have a token that has been given to me. All right. This is the token that's coming in from my current Django application, and it's now being saved within my local storage. All right. The final portion that we have to work with is our authorization header. Now, currently, if I'm working within Postman, when I send my header or when I send a request, I have to make sure that I have a header named authorization. And I have to actually include my token value in a string. Well, how do we do that within JavaScript? Because this needs to be included. Well, within JavaScript, I'm just going to call this API instance. I'll say, hey, API. I'll call all of the default values that are in there, and I want to actually access the headers. And in this case, I'm going to access common headers. Now, you could read through the documentation of Axios to be able to figure this out. API is essentially a dictionary. When you open up, or excuse me, an object. When you open up that object, there is a key named defaults. You can see that there's the key of defaults. Excuse me. Inside of this key of defaults, there is something called headers. And in headers, it's expecting you to provide something and information, right? We can go into common, and here it gives us a couple of different common attributes that are available. We could just set it ourselves here if we wanted to, but it's nice to access the common kind of as a checker to let know that we are utilizing something that belongs in there. And now it brings up some suggestions. Hey, these are some common headers that are usually included within request. And the one that we want to work with is authorization. Right? Inside of that authorization header, we make it equal to the string where we have our token and use string interpolation to insert our token key. Let's make sure our React application is still compiling. Everything is there. Awesome. Let's make sure our local storage is up to date. Okay, our local storage has all of our information. Let's test this out one more time. I'm going to actually clean out my local storage. Going to come over to my console, erase all of these console.logs. I'm going to refresh my site. Currently, my user is set to null. Awesome. Not a problem. I now have, I'm just going to go to to user messages here. All right, so here's my user. It's set to null. I have my authentication headers, and I can actually create a user. I'll go to av.iav.com. Here we'll do av. Oh, that was totally wrong. So there's undefined. We didn't get an alert message there. So the request was sent and it was unable to process, which is kind of, oh no, it was actually able to process. Interesting. So it was able to process and create the request. 201. Huh. There's some logic inside of my sign up view that isn't working appropriately. Let me see here. Create user request.data. All right. That should have failed because in my model, I do have my required fields of first name and last name. So we'll have to figure out what's going on with that later on. All right, let me go ahead and create another user here. We'll do user at user.com. My password will be of user. This is going to be first user. And here we'll have last user. Okay, I will now send my sign up request. Change your password. The password you just used was found in data breach. So it looks like Google itself didn't like my password, so they even sent my request. All right, making it complicated for me. AA@AA.com. Let's do AA, AA, and send sign up. All right, so now it finally worked properly. But I am not seeing that console.log being rendered to me. Let's make sure that it worked. If I go into application, here's my token. Fantastic. So I do have my user. I have a token. If I wanted to make this more explicitly, I can always go into my app as well to let me know that everything was successful. And here I can add something like, hey, if there's a user, then I want to see my user dot, let's just do user. That's going to cause some errors here. Interesting. I'm going to need to change something within my views. All right, that should fix that. I'm doing this because later on in my response, oh no, even in my, okay, so this is good. I apologize. All right, so we can change it inside of my app.jsx, where I can say if my user is present, then I want to show a user. I can refresh this, come over to my task manager. Let's delete all of the current users. Why not? I apologize, everyone. I know I'm jumping around a little bit. This is task. Okay, let me figure out what this database is called. To do here, I'm gonna do delete from and then this will be the user. Update or delete on table, validates foreign key constraint, off token, ID on table. Okay, so I need to delete all tokens first. Okay, so all tokens were deleted. Now I can delete all applications. Okay, so now it's telling me that I need to delete tasks. Okay, that makes sense. I expected to see something like that because of the other users. So I could just say where ID is equal to 2, delete 3, delete 4, 5, and then 6. Okay, got it. So deleted 0. So there you go. We've deleted all of our users. We can continue working within our Django server. All right. So let's log in a brand new user. Here we're going to do ab@ab.com. We'll do ab, and ab. When I click on sign up, I expect this to render properly. I'm seeing Task Manager being shown, but it's not showing me my actual user. And that makes me a little concerned. If I go to inspect and I look at my console, I'm getting this undefined message, which I'm wondering where it's coming from. If I am setting it to undefined, that means that my return value isn't coming back appropriately for my function. So let's make sure that everything's coming back correctly. Here I'm gonna console.log. response.data to make sure that works correctly. Send my request again. This is a lot of typing over and over again. I do apologize. Okay, so it looks like my request is coming back correctly, right? I am setting the response.data, I am grabbing the user and returning the user. Okay, so everything in sign up view is working. Let's see what's going on in the form. Um, oh, okay, I'm trying to grab this user key, which doesn't work because I am returning a user. So there you go. That should fix my data manipulation there. Okay, we do a refresh. We currently have null. And there you go. Now we can see we have task manager at bb.com. That was my syntax error. I apologize, everyone. A little bit of debugging process there. All right, so now I'm able to successfully sign in and store my token inside of my local storage. Well, now that my token is stored inside my local storage, what happens when I click refresh? Well, when I click refresh, I actually use my user, right? Everything goes back to null, but I don't want it to be null. I actually want it to utilize my application local storage to try to confirm if there is a user. Well, let's run through that logic, right? I'm resetting everything. I need to go to my utilities and create a new function. So I'll say export const API, or excuse me, const check info, or let's do get user. This is going to be an asynchronous function that will not receive any arguments. And I'm going to actually write some logic checking if my token is present. I apologize. I'm trying to find this block of code here that I need. There you go. All right. So I'm going to get my user. First, I'm going to grab my token. And I'm going to grab this token from local storage dot get item. And it's going to look for a value named token. Now, this is assuming that there is something within that value. Otherwise, it's going to return undefined. So if it returns undefined, we'll just return null. In the case there is a token, I want to run through that API default headers and set my token. So I'm just going to copy it and paste it, where I'm going to store the token again inside of this API because I'm refreshing, so it lost all of its headers as well. I'll then grab let response be equal to await. This is going to be API, where it's going to send a get request to users. We can follow that. It sends a get request to users. And at the user's input, we have this info. Well, info is going to return a serialized user data. I can take a look at my app user, where I have my full name and my email. As of right now, it's going to always be expecting some sort of string, whether it's my email or my full name. I'm just going to keep it common and continue to grab that email inside of my front end. All right, so there's my users. I grab my response. We know that this response will come back with email and a full name. I can then return response.data.email. All right, so this checks if there's an item inside of the local storage. If there is an item inside of the local storage, it's going to check our token and actually return it correctly. Now, how do we actually want this to be rendered? We're going to go into app.jsx. In app.jsx, I'm going to go ahead and create a use effect. Because we want this to happen upon the application mounting. And this use effect is going to have a function named getUser. Notice how I'm making it an asynchronous function, and I'll go into why here shortly. And I'll utilize this get info. I wonder if I didn't put the export statement. Oh, I had already named it get user. Interesting. Let's fetch user. All right. And this will const user be equal to await. Be equal to await and call the get user function. From there, I'll set the user to the server user, which will either be null or be the email that we're getting back. And then I'll finally call this fetch user object. All right, so why am I creating a nested function in here that's just calling the function and making it asynchronously? Well, I'm creating asynchronous functions inside of this utilities file. And by creating a synchronous function inside of my utilities file, whenever I call them inside of my application, especially if I'm utilizing it inside a use effect, I should have them wrapped by another asynchronous attribute, right? Because this is already awaiting for a response. If we don't add async and await, it's going to try to execute as normal without waiting for a response from this get user. Now, you may ask yourself, well, why not just make the entire use effect asynchronous? If you make the entire use effect asynchronous, it's going to crash your application, or it can create some sort of misbehavior because use effect is happening twice, both on mounting and dismounting. So we don't want to run into any sort of those issues. All right, let's see what happens then. Well, notice that I still have BB. And if I go into refreshing my application, for a split second there, I don't have BB, and then it populates. All right. I can actually come back over to my tasks, run this, and we can see the application is still rendering. All right. So far, what we've covered is the sign up method, and we've covered the confirm information method. We're storing our token inside of local storage, and we're also storing our token inside of our headers for the authorization header. At this point, does anyone have any questions over any of the work that I've done so far? Let's hear it, Tom.
Um, so it looks like when you refresh, it just checks for the token. It's not doing any validation for like passwords, etc. So if you have one user signed in, he can just move about and not have to sign in again, right?
Right, that's the point. We want to make sure that the user there, in case they want to refresh, in case they have to refresh the site, that we continue holding on to the user, right? Otherwise, it would be a bad user experience if every single time our browser crashed or every single time I logged out, let's say I close this, right? And then I want to come back to it. Let's say I come over to V and React. Well, I still have myself logged in, right? I never actually logged out. And that's because my token itself still exists within this application.
Got it. I guess my question could be furthered a little bit with, what if you have multiple users, therefore multiple tokens? How is it going to know which user is who?
That's a great question. So you are you talking about something like Netflix, for example?
Yeah, something like that, for example.
Okay, so we're talking about something like where we have nested users inside, right? Well, usually what happens is an account has something called an account owner, and that account owner gets the token assigned to them. All right. Now, for all of the sub users that are within that account, they'll get something called like a hash key, or they may also receive a token, but that token is going to be dependent on the master user, right? And then when you log in to the account, the token that's always being verified will be the token that allows us access to the master user, right? Or the I think that's what it's called. They're not called master users, but the account owner. I'm so sorry. And that's what will populate all of the sub tokens for all the different users. And then there will be something called like, hey, current user. And the value that's being stored on the right-hand side will be what we select, whether it's main, maybe I'll select main. If I want to go backwards and switch it, it may switch it to, hey, we want to actually utilize the user named, um, I don't know, uh, Raul, right? And just continue switching between those users. Does that answer your question, Tom?
Yeah, I think so.
Awesome. All right. Any other questions? All right. Since there aren't any other questions, our next part is going to be to actually do this loading without having that split second where um, our user isn't actually available to us. And we'll do that utilizing loader functions within our React router. But we've been going on for quite a bit. It is currently 10:05. Let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break and come back at 10:15 to continue on with our full stack process. Thanks so much, everyone.